We'll get started, and as other people come in.
Yeah, why not?
Thank you. I'm just gonna
So we will be streaming education session. So. It's okay.
Need services.
Okay.
Okay.
But we're gonna stream this one, so, yeah.
Well, that's good. Thank
Yeah, sure.
Got a level off.
Yeah, room side, right side?
Yeah, too many people on one side.
Okay.
You don't want them tipping over.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. It's been a while, I think, since we've had a learner's minion. There's been other stuff that's been happening on the first Shabbat. We had bar mitzvah in December. I forget what happened in January. Deli sale, maybe, yeah. And anyway, so we're back. So I thought that we would continue along our journey throughout the liturgy of Shabbat, and we would focus on a very well-known and important aspect of our service, of the Amidah, Tefillah. Amidah, the preamble, sort of the Amidah, the Tefillah, the words Adonai, Sevatai, Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Adonai, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. So this is the moment where we enter into the heart of our service, the set of blessings And so this is the opening line before we get to these really important blessings. And so I'd like to teach on tonight where this comes from and how we do it and why we do it. So where it comes from Psalm 51. Psalm 51:17. And this psalm, at least according to the rabbis, according to our understanding, was recited by David, or was written to be spoken from David's mouth, so to speak, after being confronted by Nathan, the prophet, about his affair with Bathsheba. So this is his prayer of, asking for forgiveness, and its invocation here establishes the absolute dependence of human beings and the idea that they are fundamentally sinful upon a beneficent God. I was born with iniquity, my sin, my mother conceived me. So the words that David is saying at this are basically a biblical idea that we have sin inherently in us. There's a rabbinic idea of that as well. We have good nature, we have bad nature. And so we ask forgiveness from God. And then it continues, I will teach transgressors your way, your sinners may return to you. Save me from blood guilt, O God, my deliverer, that I might sing forth your beneficence. O God, open my lips and let my mouth declare your praise. That's the context. Want me to bring sacrifice, desired burnt offerings. God is a contrite spirit. God, do not despise a contrite and crushed heart. This is the context of this, okay, that's been pulled out into our liturgy. Okay, context means a lot. We think that never want to look at anything in a vacuum, but of course it's been through quite a journey to get into our prayer book since then, but it's important that we know where it comes from. Okay, the idea that David is asking God, help me be a better person. Help me be this person that you need me to be. God doesn't want sacrifices. God can't possibly despise what he calls a crushed heart. He's upset. He's feeling bad about it. He's sinned. God can't hate you. So for that reason. So open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. That's where it comes from. The translation, I always want to talk about the translation. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi yagiti letecha. Open my lips. Adonai sifatai tiftach. In Hebrew, lips precede open and therefore is emphasized in the way that English grammar can't really capture it. But that's okay, guys. That my mouth may declare your praise. Okay, ufi yagiti letecha. The Hebrew reads literally, ufi yagid, and my mouth will declare. But Hebrew uses the conjunction where English prefers subordination. Other possibilities are and let, maybe perhaps the jussive, and my lips will. Okay, so the poetic aspect of it that we hear so much, Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. In the Hebrew, it's pretty close. But ufi yagiti letecha, and open up my mouth, and my mouth will declare. We see this word praise at the end. That for tehilatecha, your praise. We see that in our Mishkan Tefillah. We see that in conservative, Reconstructionist, and most of the liberal prayer books in the UK. The previous prayer book had the word glory. And so some of our people who grew up on Gates of Prayer sort of instinctively, when they're singing Adonai, right? They say, open up my mouth that my mouth may declare your. And everyone, either you hear praise or glory, right? We're just used to it, okay, from the Gates of Prayer, okay? That was changed for the melody to give both in Hebrew and English a two-syllable ending. That was it. They said, it's really praise, but it sounds better with a two-syllable ending. So now we're stuck with that, that glory. But Tehilatecha really is praise. But that's one of those choices that are made, right? There's a lot of choices that are made for that reason. In fact, tomorrow night I'm teaching at the LGCRS Havdalah about why we say the Eliyahu Hanavi, and there's a word in the Eliyahu Hanavi that did not exist, and they put it in so it would rhyme. That's awesome. So never think that our liturgy just drops from the sky. It's been messed with to fit with melodies and things like this. So whether you say praise or glory doesn't bother me. If you're a stickler for translation, go praise. If you like the two-syllable ending, go glory. Either way. So how long have we been doing this? What's the history of it? So in the 2nd century, this is around the time of the Mishnah, there was a ruling against anything between the Amidah. When I say the Amidah, we're talking about not just on Shabbat, we're talking about the Avot, the blessing of the ancestors, the Givorot, the Kedusha, Shalom Rab, all these sort of things. If you're doing the weekday service or the Saturday morning service, all of those blessings, there was a ruling by the rabbis that you're not allowed to have anything in between those prayers, which makes sense. Those have been pretty steady in the liturgy. And you're not allowed to have something right before it. That was the 2nd century ruling. In other words, it stood by itself as a rubric. It was powerful enough. You're not supposed to put anything before it. That being said, hooray for minhag, hooray for custom. All of a sudden, people started doing it. People started bringing the Psalms in, and they really liked this one, and it stuck. That's how it made it into our liturgy. We gotta love breaking the rules based on custom. So this is probably a Talmudic. When we say Talmudic, we're talking more 4th, 5th century. There was a great deal of commentary on it when it happened. So if you open up the Talmud and probably parts of the Mishnah, you'll see conversations by the rabbis on it. Is it okay to do it? Why do we do it? All these sort of things. It probably was one of those things that the rabbis couldn't stop talking about because they couldn't agree on it. So all kinds of things that went there, but basically the scholars believe that the reason why it fit in and the reason why it stayed and lasted all these generations later was that it contained a message that was important enough to keep it in. In other words, we don't just put stuff in our liturgy just because it sounds good or just because it's custom, right? Even if it was just a custom in the beginning, you have to reinsert a meaning to make sure that we can say, this is why it's in there. This is why we know it's in there. So that we believe that the rabbis said, you know what, we'll keep it in there because it's got a very powerful message. Probably the message that we just talked about in terms of what David was talking about, that as we enter into the Amidah, the heart of our service, these important prayers, we equate the Amidah now with the sacrifice. Since we don't sacrifice anymore, it's all prayers and things like that. So they thought, well, before that, we should really get into the mind of King David, get into the mind of the Psalms, and think about it that way. The rabbis then think that because we no longer have sacrifice, the Amidah stands in its place in this case, and therefore it's better than sacrifice. We've got a beautiful thing that we can do. Midrash, our 2nd and 3rd century texts that comment on the Torah, says, we are impoverished now that we cannot offer sacrifices, but God answered, I seek words from you now, from Hosea. So the rabbis said, if God doesn't need sacrifices anymore, God needs words, the things that we can create. And this is a very standard sort of rabbinic invention, the idea that once the temple falls in 70 CE, that there's no more sacrifices, there's no more priests, there's no more cultic ritual. So what can we do? And the answer was, we can pray, we can open our mouth with praise. And then the other thing that was really created at this point was the focus on loving kindness, on gimilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness, in replacement of the sacrifices. But in here, we're talking about if we cannot sacrifice, we ask God to open up our mouths, open up our lips, that our mouths can declare praise instead. The rabbis call this line here, and Amidah, tefillah, they call the tefillah, the Amidah tefillah, meaning the prayer. So when you open up Mishkan tonight, when we get to that part, you'll see on top it says Tefillah, the prayer. This is it. This is the set of prayers. And the rabbis viewed us as, quote, dumb when we want to address God. We need God's help in what we are about to do. We are just human. We're extremely fallible. We don't know how. But it also lends to other conversations. We are speaking to God. There's sort of a relationship there. And so the fact that God, the rabbinic idea that we pray correctly in old folk tales and things like that about people who can't put them into prayer. Like, well, God will get me to that. So praying with God. For prayer to praying with God. It is not two, it is teamwork, an active teamwork, working together. Ratzon, right? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Again, very similar. Yochanan in the Talmud, that's about 5th century or so. That was his custom. He doesn't say why. It's just in the Talmud. It just says this is what he does. But you set this rabbinic set of petitions, these Amidah prayers, with 2 biblical verses on either side about heartfelt prayer. I think that's really nice, actually. And that if you are reciting the Psalms, which are powerful, then force God, forces is just going to do, we're ready to go. It's a check-in. I like when we get to check in to make sure. Say Adonai, open my lips before commencing the Amidah. It was established by the rabbis. You're supposed to do it just a little bit quietly because it's a little bit intimate, right? You're taking a moment to step away from the regular liturgy and doing it a little bit more quiet. That's just a custom by the rabbis. In terms of when we're singing it, I like to sing loud enough so everyone else can hear it. But that's it. So, but it is supposed to be kind of an intimate moment. Okay. Hopefully, you have noticed that when we do, we're about to pray with God. So these 3 steps forward are supposed to indicate an intimacy with God that you are getting close. You also take 3 steps back because God is a ruler, a melech, a sovereign, and so. Okay. At the end, by the way, whenever we study Yuli Ratzon, at the end, and Osei Shalom B'Ramav, you'll see people stepping back 3 times, Osei Shalom B'Ramav and bowing. Same sort of stuff. You're stepping out and you're stepping back because you're ending the Amidah, you're ending the prayer with God. The Chassids, I wanted to bring in their perspective, the sort of mystical Orthodox ideas. The psalm says, God, would you please open my mouth? So they say, hey, who's working my mouth anyway? The ocean and we are the waves. Very Hasidic thoughts, very mystic, very sort of, out there thinking about the closeness of God. God's the ocean and we are the waves. Rabbi Karamos, Talmud Shapira of Pitzna, he stated, not only does God hear our prayers, God prays them through us as well. In other words, there's all kinds of Hasidic teachings about how God prays too. God prays with us. God prays the prayers that we want. The prayers that talking about the Avot, Geburot, Shah, all these sort of penitentials. They sound like they come from you, but they come from a higher source. It's another attempt to help us find beautiful that the idea that they're taking more of a literal idea that God opens up our mouth and discuss what has happened to it over the years. As Mayor Wise, these are the 19th century Reform prayer books. They omitted it. They thought it was unnecessary. That's sort of it's a particular theology in Judaism to have a personal God. When Christianity came on the scene, that was very much something that they sort of took and ran with. And so a lot of Jewish rabbis, things like that, ran away from it. A broader idea of the relationship between God and the Jewish people and a more communal idea. That comes right down to the idea of the Amidah things that we have to do as one is the relationship of God in general with Israel rather than a personal connection. The line, on the other hand, bothered the people who think that way because unlike the modern idea of God's understanding of a relationship with Israel as a community. The Psalms, specifically in the one Psalm 51, right, with David, is extremely personal, of God speaking to someone in Hadash in Britain. It's in Hadash Alev in Israel. There are certain ones that still don't have it more. And again, if you ever want to know what Jews believe at a certain time, look at the prayer books. Because if you study a prayer, that people didn't want that. But the verse, the rabbi before approaching the ark would bend down and walk 3 steps and then stand back up. And they did it for 100 years, and nobody knew why. Until finally, but they were like, no, this is minhag, this is tradition, we always do it. And so the new rabbi was like, why? Why do we do that? I don't understand. And this is it. The story about that is like, where it came from, right? Completely logistic or arranged, right? But no, that part I've never heard. How to, maintain humility in front of God, know before whom you stand, that sort of stuff. And it pairs with the Osei Shalom, the walking back 3 steps as well, and the bowing, those sort of things. So those sort of choreography were connected. It's a good story for another reason, for another teaching, which I love. I love those sort of like, no, we've got to do it. And they're like, it was just too small, So I love that. Any other questions? Yes. All right. Well, that's great. That's wonderful. Well, good. Well, wonderful. So whatever, and you can do it in either direction, doesn't matter. And what the rabbis are talking about. We're about to enter into a really important part of our service. So let's get into the mindset and be very personal and intimate about it. Okay? Great. Okay, guys, give me about 5 minutes or so, and then we will start our couple of Shabbat. Thank you so much for being here.